At this point, I'm sure most of you have heard of PragerU, a YouTube channel primarily known for its short 5-minute videos on a variety of topics that was founded by religious right activist and conservative Dennis Prager. I won't be going into Dennis too much specifically in this video because it's not really relevant to the topic at hand, but if you want to know more, I would personally recommend the Rational Wiki articles on both him and his 2014 book, Still the Best Hope. They'll give you a good idea of what kind of man this is. Also, fun fact, he is the person Trey Parker and Matt Stone based their Officer Barbrady voice off of. However, the main reason why I'm not talking too much about Dennis is because he's not the one who's actually presenting the video. The video I'm covering is on the 2021 bombing campaign Israel did over Gaza, and it is presented by a man named David Brog. Brog was previously the executive director of Christians United for Israel, an organization of Christian Zionists that was founded by a man named John Hagee. If you remember the blood moon prophecies, that was John Hagee. John Hagee also believes that Jews brought the Holocaust onto themselves because they disobeyed God, that Hitler is part Jewish, and that the Antichrist is going to be half Jewish and half homosexual. I should also note, this isn't Brog's first video for PragerU on the topic of Israel. He also made a video on why there isn't a Palestinian state, which was thoroughly debunked by a YouTube channel called Office Hours with the Mad Professor, which I would highly recommend watching. But with all that said, let's actually get into this video.
What would you do? That can be a very useful question. It can be both clarifying and humbling when evaluating complex situations. To illustrate this, let's apply it to a real-world example.
Man, this guy pauses a lot. And his speaking style also sounds incredibly robotic. It's like after every sentence he needs to pause to let the teleprompter he's reading off of pull up a new sentence. This very much drags out the video. It also stops him from sounding like a human being. Okay, I'm exaggerating slightly, but I think you guys see my point. What is it with this guy and pausing? And he does this throughout the entire video, albeit not to quite this extent as he did in the opening, but it's still really noticeable and, to be honest, really annoying. Like, dude, this video's already 5 minutes. You can't make it to 5 minutes without pausing constantly?
In May 2021, Israel and Hamas fought a brief war in Gaza. Nearly everyone knows that Hamas started the conflict. Firing rockets into a neighboring country is the very definition of aggression.
Yeah, that's also not what started the conflict. The specific conflict began when Israel raided a mosque during Ramadan on April 13th, 2021. Israel also closed the Damascus Gate that Palestinians had traditionally used for celebrations.
And Israel responded as any country under attack would. Yet many blamed Israel, not Hamas, for the violence.
Because Israel was provoking Gaza through raiding their mosques. Why are you ignoring this? I should note, it's not even like he mentions this raid, which began the conflict that he's talking about, and calls it justified. He just never so much as brings it up.
People are certainly entitled to criticize the Jewish state, even when it defends itself. But before you do so, ask yourself a question. The one I posed at the opening. What would you do? So congratulations. You have just been made Prime Minister of Israel.
Am I the only one who finds it funny just how depressed this guy looks?
And Mr. or Madam Prime Minister, we've got a problem. Hamas is firing hundreds of rockets at our cities. Yes, our missile defense system is stopping most of these from hitting their targets, but many are getting through.
I want to note something about the graphic PragerU puts up on screen. Notice how all the rockets either hit the Iron Dome or get through to Israel. Now, if you go to PragerU's website, you can actually find their sources for some of their claims. And We will be going back to this a couple of times for the record, including their claim that although most Hamas rockets are stopped by the Iron Dome, some do get through. Their source for this is an article from Defense News, which Wikipedia officially lists as a tabloid, by the way, which makes the following note, quote, "Since May 10th, approximately 3,000 rockets have been fired from the Gaza Strip at Israel. Iron Dome intercepted more than 1,000 of them, representing 90% of those determined to pose a threat. Many rockets fall in open airs and don't even leave the Gaza Strip due to malfunctions. Hamas UAVs have now been added to the rocket threat. 2/3 of Hamas rockets aren't even considered a threat to Israel." So this graphic is incredibly misleading.
In recent days, Hamas missiles killed an Arab-Israeli citizen and his daughter, as well as a 5-year-old Jewish boy.
Fun fact, for every 15 people killed in the Israel-Palestine conflict, 13 are Palestinians.
Millions of your people have been forced into bomb shelters. The economy is shut down. Your citizens, Jews and Muslims alike, are terrified and demanding action. What are you going to do? You have two options. Option 1, do nothing. Israel is stronger than Hamas, and therefore people who dislike Israel will portray you as a bully if you respond. This leads to a lot of bad press.
And yet, a study from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting found that the media was overwhelmingly pro-Israel during this conflict. Hell, even looking at the article you guys cite from the Jerusalem Post, critics of Israel are less attacking the Netanyahu government for defending itself and more blaming it for getting into the conflict in the first place, specifically saying they primarily believe he's doing so in hopes of keeping himself in power. To quote one of the protesters, "Like a corrupt leader at the end of his road, the accused, Netanyahu, is leading Israel into chaos to prevent a changed government. It has been proved once more that Netanyahu is dangerous for Israel, and there is no red line he won't cross." Of course, Netanyahu was facing corruption charges at the time, and as he had for 2 years prior, and was later ousted as prime minister that same year and replaced with his defense secretary, Benny Gantz.
So to avoid a PR disaster, tell your citizens to stay in their bomb shelters and hope that Hamas will run out of missiles soon. Or option 2.
Considering option 1 was do nothing, I'm going to assume that option 2 would be do literally anything. After all, those are the actual only two options.
Defend yourself.
Nope, never mind, we're getting a false dichotomy.
Use your powerful military to stop the missile fire so that your people can go back to their lives. If you choose to defend yourself, then you're doing what Israel does. The first responsibility of every government is to keep its citizens safe from invasion, violence, and terror. So you've given the order to stop the missile fire. But wait, there's a big problem. Hamas operates in the heart of Gaza's densely populated cities.
I wonder how Gaza got so small.
It stores its missiles in apartment buildings, hospitals, and schools.
I just want to note, their major source for this claim is an article from the Washington Post with the headline, "Why Hamas Stores Weapons Inside Hospitals, Mosques, and Schools," that never actually explains why Hamas does this. Again, because Hamas only use these areas to store rockets because they have nowhere else to store them. In fact, when Hamas's senior official, Ghazi Hamad, was asked about this, he specifically said that Hamas only did so because so much of Gaza is just nothing more than a giant urban center. The Gaza Strip is 140 square miles. Meanwhile, the state of Rhode Island, the smallest state in the United States, is about 1,200 square miles. Obviously, Hamas is still bad for doing this. However, we have to at the very least be able to recognize why they're doing this. And again, it's because there's nowhere else to store them in Gaza.
And it fires its missiles from residential neighborhoods. They don't care that using civilians as human shields like this is a war crime. So stopping the missile fire will require you to strike Hamas in the heart of Gaza's population centers.
You also have to hit a building that contains Al Jazeera and the Associated Press. We aren't quite sure why you need to do this, but if anyone asks, just claim Hamas was there. Don't provide any evidence, though. Oh, and for that matter, you'll also have to bomb a refugee camp. Again, don't ask us why. Hamas was probably there. Yeah, one of the things that makes this video just so infuriating is I was carefully watching and writing about this conflict while it was happening, and to see it distorted to such a level is honestly just maddening. If you want to know more about the specific incident where Israel bombed the Gaza media tower that contained both the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, well, I have 2 articles on that topic, those being In Search of Hamas and The Associated Press Has Israel Stockholm Syndrome, both of which talk about this in great detail.
If you want to protect your citizens, you risk harming Palestinian civilians. What are you going to do? You have 2 options. Option 1, do nothing. The terrorists have outsmarted you by using your own morality against you. You're trapped by your own decency. Tell your citizens to stay in their bomb shelters and hope that Hamas will run out of missiles soon. Or, option 2.
Again, given that option 1 was quite literally don't do anything, the other option would only be do anything.
Do everything possible to stop the Hamas missiles while protecting Palestinian civilians. How? Before you conduct an operation, drop thousands of leaflets warning that you're coming. Create safe corridors for civilians to flee. And before you strike a particular building, warn every person in that building that you're coming. Call and text their cell phones, and then make sure they've actually left.
I just want to point out that their sources for their claim that Israel did this during their 2021 bombing campaign over Gaza is 2 articles from 2014. Now, I'm not saying that Israel didn't drop leaflets in 2021. That is perfectly possible. However, I also know for a fact that they used roof knockers in both 2014 and 2021. For those who don't know, roof knockers are supposed to be smaller bombs that you drop as a kind of warning shot that a bigger bomb is going to be dropped. The issue is, despite them being smaller bombs, they're still bombs, so they still do large amounts of damage to Gaza. In 2009, the United Nations released the GOLDSTONE report, which found both that roof knockers do harm innocent civilians when used by Israel, and that they are not an effective means of warning, something the Israeli government essentially admitted that same year. Despite that, the Israeli government still uses them.
If you choose option 2, you're doing what Israel does. Yes, you're giving up the element of surprise. Yes, the terrorists will most likely take their missiles and flee along with the civilians. And yes, by letting the terrorists escape to fight another day, you're endangering your own people. But this is what Israel insists upon doing in order to protect Palestinians.
Which they killed 313 of in 2021 alone, 71 of which were children.
Unfortunately, not every country is as moral as Israel. When countries are stronger than their adversaries, they actually have a third option: indiscriminate bombing. So you could simply bomb Gaza without trying to limit civilian casualties.
Here is a quote from May 11th, 2021, of a video address that then Defense Minister, now Prime Minister Benny Gantz gave to the people of Gaza. If the citizens of Israel have to sleep in shelters, then Gaza will burn. How is anyone supposed to take that besides, at the very least, a threat of indiscriminate bombings? Anyway, the last minute is basically him just talking about how moral the Israeli army is, which I've addressed all his reasons for thinking that earlier in the video, so I'm ending it here. Final thoughts? If you are a Zionist and watching this video, meaning you support Israel, that is perfectly fine. I have nothing against those who, after listening to the facts, come to a different conclusion than I do. What I do have an issue with is people making up facts or lying. That was my issue with David Brogg. Again, supporters of Israel are perfectly welcome. Liars are not. Good night and good luck.